Okay, so now when you're done with all your color maps, this is something you should get. I've done exactly what I was showing before. I just finished off the rest of the head, just laying down even coverage all over. I've also cleaned up the eyes a bit, got rid of all the eyelashes, and finished off the ear on the other side and the neck. So I'm really happy with this base for the skin. However, we're nowhere near done. I want to show you now how I go about adding more variation and color correcting things towards things that I want. Because originally, like I said, the skin tone was a little bit too olive, and I wanted to go for more the Eastern European white Caucasian look. So there's a couple things I can do. So now that I've got all this coverage, and this is something I want to talk to you about that I didn't mention before. You guys may have noticed this bar here that used to be green but now is red. Well, this indicates basically which layers are the most offensive in terms of your disk cache. This is something that's currently still being worked on, so it's not nearly done. But the concept is basically when you start building up a lot of layers and a lot of folders, in order to maintain some kind of normalcy in terms of how Mari runs, you can cache certain layers and certain folders that you're not using at the moment, or that you're done with. So say that, for argument's sake, I'm going to grab all these layers and put them into a folder. I'm just going to group them and call it base skin, and I'm happy with this. And I know I don't want to touch this base skin anymore, so I'm going to cache this base layer. So it's currently caching. And it's going to go dark black. It's going to basically gray out. And as you can see, that layer now went to green. So now I'm using less of my disk cache when I'm painting. So now I can continue working, which is a really cool feature. And will be very handy when you're working on hero assets that have a lot of layers and whatnot. So that's a little bit about the caching system in Mari. So now I want to go and color correct this once more. So I'm going to go to saturation, and I'm going to tone this down. And I'm going to go to hue, saturation, and lightness, and go more towards the Caucasian look. And this is my epidermal color. And for epidermal color, basically, from a physiological standpoint, it's the outermost layer of your skin, and that layer is technically dead skin. So during the day and during your life and during the years, your skin is constantly flaking off, and the epidermal layer is the dead skin that inevitably flakes off at the end. So when you're painting these epidermal maps, now it really depends where you're working, what kind of skin shader model you're using with regards to how you paint these maps. But I'm going to show you how I paint these for personal use at home when I'm painting characters and creatures for Arnold and the skin shader in Arnold. I've used the skin shader with V-Ray as well, and it's pretty much more or less the same thing. It's just built a little bit differently. But in terms of how I paint my maps, it pretty much goes the same way. So for the epidermal layer, I make sure that it's a lot less saturated than any of the subdermal layers, because it is essentially dead skin, so it should look like a really pale version of yourself, or of the skin that you're painting, to give you an idea visually of what you're aiming for. So this is about what I want. I may even go even more, something like that, which is what I'm happy with. And I'm, again, doing it on separate layers, so when I go to do my subdermal layers in the future, I don't destroy what I've done originally. And this is pretty good for me. So from here, I want to start adding in some color variation. and get some variation in the eyes. And I'm only going to do this very subtly in the epidermal layer, but really punch it up in the dermal and subdermal. So the first thing I want to do is get a different tone. It's more of kind of a bluish hue. And I'm going to mask that. And then with a very soft paintbrush, making sure I have white. I'm going to get some of that bluing in there. Again, very, very subtle. We want to get just the sense of it. And this is going a little bit too red for my liking, so I'm going to adjust this on the fly. That's a bit better. So just slightly. Just get that extra color variation in the eyes. Because depending, a lot of Eastern European women have very, very thin skin, and so you see a lot of those kind of dark circles in the eyes and in the eye sockets. And I want to kind of accent that ever so slightly. I'm happy with that. And so now I want to play with some warmer tones, just on the eyelids and on the nose, places like that. And just to keep things organized, I'm going to start labeling this stuff. Okay. So I want to go for more of the reds, like so. Hide it again. And again, this is the epidermal layer, so I don't want to go too crazy, but you just want to have a touch of it. I've found from my experience. Works out nicely this way. So as you can see, just slight. Now, ultimately, you want to bring this into a shader and give it a test just to see how it plays. And you may decide that it's too much. You want to tone some of that back. So that's where it kind of becomes trial and error. Like so. And then I want to do that for the ears as well. So I'm going to go into the Ortho UV tab. Get a little bit more warmth. So this is where it becomes handy because I didn't paint it down the, or sorry, I didn't cut the seam down the spine of the ear, that I can really gesturally plug in some values here and get some cool tones. I know it's within the realm of the ear, so I'm happy with that. I'm going to go even warmer now, just for the eyelids. And I'm doing the same thing. I'm going to hide it. just get in here. Just ever so slightly. Like so. So we're getting those nice pinky tones right on the eyelids, which is what we want. So as you can see, these tones are coming together. So if I were to group these, oh, that's interesting. Looks like if I group a group on top of a group, it doesn't pick up below it, which is okay. Anyway, the point I'm trying to make is when I turn these off, you can see the difference in terms of the skin tone I'm trying to go for, like so. So from here, I'm pretty happy with these maps. So now comes the question of how do I export these? Before in Mari, what we would do is go into the shader, we would bake out the shader into a new channel and then export that. Well, the nice thing about Mari now is you don't have to do any of that quote-unquote baking out of shaders. All you need to do is you can export directly from a layer, the layer tab, or you can export directly from the channels tab. If I know that everything in here is what I see is what I like, I can just go to the channels tab, right click, export flatten current channel flattened, and that will export everything in this channel that I see currently, and I'll flatten it down. Or if I'm in my layers tab, I can select all these layers and I'll right click and I'll go to same thing, export, but export selected layers. You can't see it kind of cuts off at the bottom of the screen. And then that'll export whatever you've selected, which is kind of handy. So if you have a bunch of folders in here and you don't want to export them, you don't have to. So we're pretty much done with the epidermal maps. From here, I'm going to show you how I go into creating the specular maps from these maps, and then the displacements and the subdermal maps. But first, I think before I jump in the displacement spec, because we've done so much development to the color maps for the epidermal, I'm going to show you in the next section how we jump into creating the shallow, mid, and deep subdermal maps for this character.